Isn't it true that one of the biggest realizations that we've had this year is the value of exploring the great outdoors? And if you ask us, what better way of doing that than on a motorcycle? Today, we've come a long way from our base in Mumbai on these two sub 400cc adventure tourers with the aim of exploring our beautiful world. And while at it, tell you which is the motorcycle that you should choose. The plan was simple. Take these adventure tourers and head down a quick highway. And as with any long distance journey, we set out early to beat traffic. Though we did encounter a rush of trucks trying to make it out of the city, we soon found ourselves on a wide, open and rather empty NH48. That meant we could wind the throttle wide open and make the most of the inviting ribbon of tarmac. And that experience confirmed what was already apparent on paper. The KTM is the quicker motorcycle of the two by a good margin. After all, it has the engine displacement, power and torque advantage over the G310 GS's engine. Despite weighing a little more than the Bavarian motorcycle, the 390 Adventure manages to out-accelerate the Beamer at all times. The power delivery is relatively eager, and once you're past 3000 RPM, this engine comes into its own. It is for this very nature that the KTM 390 single-cylinder engine has managed to garner such a wide fan following. Complementing the engine is the smooth 6-speed gearbox with well-spaced ratios. The KTM's engine feels much more happier while riding on highway speeds, say at around 100 kph. At that speed, the engine is spinning at 5500 rpm, which is about 500 rpm lower than the BMW GS's motor at that same speed. The tall 6-gear sure helps, and what you'll also notice is that the engine runs smooth and nearly vibration-free at highway speeds. That translates to a relaxed cruising experience over the course of a long day in the saddle. Speaking of vibrations, this was one of the biggest issues that plagued the BS4 BMW G310 GS. But thankfully, it is far improved with the BS6 motorcycle. With the BS6 update, this engine has become a lot more refined compared to the BS4 motor. Also, when it comes to low-speed tractability, this engine is far better than the KTM's engine. This allows you to poodle around at lower speeds in higher gears. Try doing that on the KTM and it becomes grumpy. The trick is to ensure you stick the KTM in the right gear to match the speed. The BMW also gets the ride-by-wire as part of the BS6 update, and that has also made the throttle response pretty crisp, while the previous motorcycle's tendency to stall has been taken care of. In comparison to the KTM, the BMW's power delivery is not aggressive, and many beginners out there will appreciate this. However, the experienced folk may want more poke from the engine, and you will notice that the BMW's engine doesn't feel as effortless as the KTM's at speeds in excess of 110 and 120 kph. In fact, you really need to rev out this engine to get up to those speeds. To conclude, if effortless high-speed cruising is what you seek from your adventure tourer, the 390 Adventure will serve the role far better than the BMW. Where the BMW's engine manages to claw back a few points is by offering better fuel efficiency in the city. On the flip side, the 390's taller 6-cog results in better highway economy. Factor in the KTM's larger fuel tank and you can cover more kilometers between fill-ups, which is great when you're out touring. Another aspect about the KTM that you'll appreciate over a long journey is its comfortable ergonomics. Once seated on the 390 Adventure, you will appreciate its long and wide perch. There's so much space around you that you can move around over a long period of time. But when you're standing, you will notice that this handlebar is a little too low, especially if you're a tall rider, so you would want to invest in handlebar risers. The BMW's ergonomics are comparatively more relaxed, as the foot pegs aren't as rear set as the KTM, and the handlebar is placed high up for a comfortable reach and an upright riding position. While standing on the BMW GS310, you will notice that there's a lot of purchase for your knees on this fuel tank. The handlebar is a little high and that results in a very natural position while you're standing. When you're seated, you're locked into the bike, which is great, but over a long distance you would have wished for a little bit more space. Nevertheless, the BMW seat is firm and supportive, and both motorcycles are comfortable all-day riding machines. Eventually, there will be a time when you'll wander off the highway, down the trail, and that's where their long travel suspension and ground clearance will come in handy. Although, one must bear in mind that neither motorcycle is a hardcore off-roader. That said, they can handle a fair amount of bashing down a muddy, gravelly trail or even over rocky surfaces, as long as you remember to avoid really big hits on the rims. That being said, the BMW does have an edge over the KTM in terms of the ease with which you can ride it off-road. Firstly, it'll keep you more comfortable, not only because of the relatively natural ergos while standing on the pegs, but also because of the extra suspension travel and much softer ride. The additional 20 mm of ground clearance and the tractable engine that we mentioned about earlier are other factors that make it easy to ride this motorcycle off tarmac. That's not to say that the 390 Adventure is left lagging behind, lost in the dust kicked up by the GS. It can keep up with the BMW and handle most off-road trails, including the odd trip to Ladakh in case you were wondering, but it won't be as comfortable. The only issue that short riders will face is the 855mm seat height, which, to drive home the point, is higher than that of the Triumph Tiger 900 GT. Also, one needs to slip the clutch over really slow and tricky sections, and the traction control system is best switched off owing to its tendency to over-intervene and chop power when you need it the most. Switchable ABS, however, is a nice feature for sliding out the rear, and I wish BMW offered the same. It is clear that both motorcycles are best enjoyed on tarmac rather than off it, and here is where the KTM truly shines. KTM's WP Apex suspension is set on the firmer side, but at the same time it does a pretty good job of soaking up bumps and undulations. That said, if you ride over a deep rut, you will feel the jolt up your spine. The trade-off then lies in the planted and confidence-inspiring handling. The KTM's firm suspension setup pays dividends in the corners, and the front end offers enough feedback for you to push hard. This despite running on 19-inch front wheels. The dual-purpose Metzeler Tourance tires are also responsible for the faith you have in the KTM's abilities, and on the whole, it remains a fun motorcycle to chuck around corners. At this point, we would like to mention that due to ongoing tire import issues, KTM is forced to offer the 390 Adventure with MRF tires that you'd find on the KTM 250 Adventure instead of the Metzellers. KTM says that they are trying to resolve this, and hopefully the 390 Adventure will come with Metzeler Tourance tires at a future date. Moving on now, the BMW rides on the same Metzellers, albeit with a wider rear tire. But the suspension setup affects confidence when you begin to push hard, and I wish the front end had better feel. BMW suspension is set on the softer side, and that results in a very plush ride when you're riding over bad roads. The drawback is that when you hit a really sharp bump, the rear tends to bottom out. Plus, if you're braking hard, the front end dives a little too much and you have to get used to that. It is a clear toss between outright comfort and communicative handling between the two motorcycles. And at the end of the day, it is all about your priorities from a motorcycle. And just like the way these motorcycles ride and handle, they also differ in the way they look, with clear inspiration from their elder adventure siblings. When it comes to design, both of these motorcycles offer a fine blend of form and function. But the more you look at the BMW G310 GS, the more you start to appreciate its imposing stance. The GS's beak, fuel tank and minimal rear is reminiscent of the bigger motorcycles in the GS lineup, and their new rally paint scheme adds to the visual appeal. The motorcycle's quality level is also slightly above the KTM, evident in the gleaming paint, tactile switchgear, the T-clamp finish, or the way the wires are neatly tucked away out of sight. On the KTM, some of the wiring is visible, especially around the steel trellis frame. The buttons on the switchgear aren't as well damped, but that's about the only quality-related gripe that I've got with the Austrian motorcycle. Otherwise, it is well built and looks ready to take a beating, evident in the standard handguards and crash protection that the BMW doesn't get. In terms of looks, the praying mantis style design, inspired by the KTM 790 Adventure, has begun to grow on me. It isn't pretty, but purposeful is the apt way to describe the 390 Adventure. Since these motorcycles are designed as adventure tourers, there is enough space and mounting points to attach luggage. The BMW, however, comes with a large aluminium rack as standard, enhancing its versatility when it comes to mounting a bag or even the top box. While extra luggage carrying capacity is a good thing, I wish BMW's feature list had that something extra as well.
The KTM trumps the BMW when it comes to features, and that pushes its value quotient to a level that the GS simply cannot match.
Both motorcycles have adjustable levers and all LED lights, but that's where the similarities end. The KTM's feature list includes 3-axis IMU assisted cornering ABS and traction control, an up and down quick shifter, as well as full color TFT display with Bluetooth connectivity. It also features turn-by-turn navigation, which is a must on any adventure motorcycle in today's day and age. Sadly, the BMW makes do with a simple LCD display, and although it shows real-time consumption and other trip-related data, it isn't as modern as the KTM screen. Now, BMW could have simply borrowed the tech from its partner TVS's Apache RR310, but that probably would have bumped up the price. Speaking of which, BMW threw a curveball by slashing the price of the G310 GS by a huge margin. At Rs 2.85 lakh ex-showroom, the BMW undercuts the KTM 390 Adventure by Rs 20,000. And if that's not appealing enough, the brand value that BMW commands is unparalleled. That said, the cost of the ownership is a crucial factor that must be considered before putting the money down on an adventure motorcycle. The bikes are bound to take a tumble at some point, and the cost of replacement parts must be factored in. Then there's the cost of general service that includes fresh oil, oil filter, and other consumables to consider. As far as service intervals are concerned, the BMW requires service every 10,000 kilometers or a year, while the KTM needs to be serviced every 5,000 kilometers. Speaking of service, BMW's service network is considerably smaller than the KTM's huge network. That is a definite advantage for bikes like this because it will be easier to find a dealership to carry out repairs if necessary on a long tour.
The BS6 BMW G310 GS addresses two major concerns that plague the BS4 model. It was price and engine refinement. This motorcycle is much nicer to ride now, and if you're looking for a well-rounded package in the sub 400cc adventure tourer space, this is the motorcycle that you should go for. Not to mention the prestige value that a BMW badge commands. However, with all of this, it still can't match the KTM when it comes to features, performance, as well as sheer fun factor, which is why this is the motorcycle that we would choose in this segment.